I actually started occasionally making a suggestion, and they never, it never went anywhere. Kind of pissed me off a little bit.
Ron Howard, the man everyone calls Hollywood's nicest director, has finally revealed his breaking point. At 71, the Oscar-winning filmmaker named the 6 actors he reportedly hated working with the most. From explosive egos to shocking betrayals, these aren't just creative disagreements, they're Hollywood war stories. So who made Ron lose his patience? Which legendary star nearly drove him off set? In this video, we uncover the truth behind decades of quiet tension, leaked stories, and rare interviews. Stay tuned, because number 2 will absolutely shock you. 6. Tom Sizemore. Ron Howard runs his sets like a symphony. Quiet baton, steady tempo, every player knowing when to come in. The goal isn't chaos, it's control that feels invisible, the kind that lets actors forget the machinery and fall into truth. Which is why, when Tom Sizemore arrived on Ransom in 1996, the vibe reportedly shifted from metronome to meteor storm. Sizemore was a force, gritty, magnetic, raw. Exactly the kind of intensity audiences loved him for, and exactly the kind of volatility a clockwork production can't easily absorb. Crew members would later describe a palpable tension in the air, the sense that the scene you rehearsed might not be the scene you shot, because one person's energy could spike or crash without warning. Howard's philosophy is simple. Preparation creates freedom. You plan so that discovery has a safe playground. Insiders say Sizemore's process pushed against that rhythm. Call sheets didn't feel like promises. They felt like suggestions. An entrance might ignite, then fizzle. A line could come out electric, then arrive like static in the very next take. It wasn't about missing marks or forgetting dialogue, people said. It was about an unpredictability that bent the room around it. On a Howard set, where calm is culture, that kind of uncertainty becomes expensive fast. In time, in focus, in trust. There was one day when it was said in hushed, careful tones that the production had to stop dead in its tracks, not because the lights had failed, nor because the cameras jammed, but because the emotional weather was wrong. Howard, apparently, called for a reset, so diplomatic that it is fault. There were no raised voices, but no public scolding. His major action seemed to be to reblock coverage and alter shot order, as well as rebuild the day based on the energy he actually had, not the energy the schedule assumed. It is the soft power version of crisis management. Don't escalate, contain. The sound on the set didn't explode. It blew out, but everyone got the subtext. When the director protects the rhythm at such a scale, that's a flare. At times, the clock bleeds minutes. This chapter is exciting because the images worked. Sizemore's presence on screen is coiled, menacing, alive, and crackles in Ransom. Howard has been brilliant at channeling messy brilliance into clean frames, and sources say he did it again here, adapting on the fly like a veteran quarterback reading a broken play. The toll was visible in the workflow, however. Assistant directors, ever the triage nurses in production, had to manage resets. Heads of departments tightened up their communication. The set family feeling Howard builds, egalitarian, respectful, quietly cheering, had to put on a suit of armor. You can feel that kind of tension even when nobody says anything. It is there in between setups and edges into the rhythm of a lunch break. Whereas the lesson was not at all about blame, as people around Howard would have you believe, it was more about borders. Passion is the spirit on a film set. To have discipline is an account that keeps it. When it becomes a roulette wheel, trust decays between actor and director, between director and crew, and, just as crucially, between the film and the schedule. Howard did not moralize. He designed. He narrowed variables, increased coverage insurance, and found performance beats that didn't require perfect conditions to land. In other words, he engineered volatility and preserved the movie without publicly breaking the man. When Sizemore died in 2023, Howard didn't issue long quotes or sweeping elegies, and observers noted the silence. Maybe that's the most telling coda. Not cruelty, just distance. For a director who prizes preparation, the Ransom experience became a case study in the cost of unpredictability. The day stops, the crew waits, the plan bends, and the leader chooses containment rather than confrontation. Volcano on a clockwork set isn't a moral judgment, it's a physics problem. Lava is riveting. It also finds the cracks. Howard's career, built on steadiness, exactly learned where to crack those cracks apart and how to route the flow without burning down the studio. If you thought Ron Howard's patience was unbreakable, the next actor proved otherwise. Andy Griffith. When Ron Howard first stepped onto the set of The Andy Griffith Show in 1960, he was just 6 years old, a red-haired kid from Oklahoma, with a natural charm that lit up the screen. To the world, he was Opie Taylor, the innocent son of Sheriff Andy, living in the picture-perfect town of Mayberry. To Ron, the set was a second home, and Andy Griffith felt like a second father. Griffith took him under his wing, encouraging the boy's instincts and teaching him the rhythms of performance. "Andy made me feel like I belonged," Howard once said. In those early years, the relationship was tender, playful, and genuine, a mentorship that seemed to embody the warmth of the show itself. But as the seasons rolled on and the pressures of success tightened their grip, the idyllic picture began to crack. By the mid-1960s, the show was a phenomenon, and Andy Griffith's name was synonymous with small-town decency. Yet behind the folksy charm, insiders noticed a shift. Griffith had become moody, withdrawn, even volatile at times. The weight of carrying one of television's biggest hits was immense, and it began to change the tone of the set. Crew members described him as controlling and quick-tempered when things didn't align with his vision. Ron, now entering his teens, sensed the difference most acutely. The easy laughter between takes grew rarer. The gentle guidance turned curt. It was, as one castmate later said, like watching a summer sky cloud over. Howard was learning his first lesson in the gap between public image and private temperament, a lesson that would quietly shape the director he'd later become. The straw perhaps broke the camel's back through years of age and confidence in his own craft. It was perhaps through several years of getting older and becoming more self-assured in the craft. Howard was no longer satisfied merely hitting his marks. He began asking thought-provoking questions about story arcs, motivation, and, to Griffith, low-key challenges in authority. The father-son dynamic that had once felt natural now had an edge to it. Griffith, familiar with doing things exactly as he believed they should be done at the end of the day, would not always have seen eye to eye with his on-screen son when it came to the growing independence. According to crew memories, there were days when Griffith's frustration came out in sharp exchanges against long silences. For young Ron, that was confusing. This was the guy who taught him everything he knew about professionalism. But that confusion evolved into understanding. One learns early how to navigate dominating personalities, he would later reflect, especially when someone can turn on the charm for a take, then shut it down completely between scenes. In the wake of his starred show ending in 1968, their relationship began to cool. No quarrels erupted, no gossip generated about them, just distance. They never worked together again, hardly got to talk to one another, only showing up in the spotlight when necessity demanded doing so. When Griffith transformed into a television legend, Howard moved on from a child star to a then amateur filmmaker, a good kind, empty with the discipline he had brought with him when he tasted it from there. Says Howard, probably short and carefully worded, while reminiscing over Griffith's burial in 2012, "He shaped me in ways I am still understanding. No bitterness here, only boundaries." As he began to plan his own directorial career, he'd figured out what his leadership shouldn't look like. In those early days, Howard gobbled up a length of the power trip that has stayed with him to this day. Later deciding that in his movies, Harmony was to be an aspect he would be known for, completing the warmth seen on screen with the warmth behind it. His production was based on respect in every sense, one that worked with mutual respect and soft communication, rather than relying on overblown egos. If you ask the many who have been in contact with him, they have always found the paradox between his easygoing personality and the image of the past century, that of an emotional genius. For Ron, learning his lessons from Mayberry was less nostalgic and more about the structure. He was shown how emotional stress and a sense of ego could cloud an atmosphere of creativity. As he started in films, it was with a foundation of cooperation, empathy, and consistency. In retrospect, The Quiet Storm of Mayberry was not merely about Andy Griffith's quiet, hidden volatility, but rather it meant the cost of leadership under pressure. And for young artists, learning those lessons through osmosis. For Howard, it became the lifelong study of emotional management, seeing how charisma masks insecurity, how respect isn't commanded through fear, even how legends have blind spots. It is the paradox of his career. America's nicest director honed to perfection in the shadows of a man not always nice. The small-town dream that molded him in growing up taught him as well the fragility of that dream, how much work it takes to keep peace when cameras stop rolling. 4. Russell Crowe. When Ron Howard and Russell Crowe first teamed up for A Beautiful Mind in 2001, it looked like a perfect pairing. Howard was Hollywood's dependable craftsman, a director who balanced heart with discipline. Crowe was the era's reigning embodiment of intensity, fresh off his Oscar win for Gladiator and revered for his total immersion in character. Together, they seemed destined to make something transcendent. And they did. The film went on to win Best Picture and Best Director. But behind that graceful, polished masterpiece was a daily tug-of-war between two creative forces who approached art from opposite ends of the spectrum. For Howard, filmmaking was structure, collaboration, and careful orchestration. For Crowe, it was chaos, instinct, and the relentless pursuit of emotional truth. The clash between genius and process became as dramatic as anything on screen. From the beginning, Crowe treated the production like a proving ground. Playing the brilliant but tormented mathematician John Nash, he reportedly came to set each day armed with an arsenal of ideas, some brilliant, others baffling. He questioned dialogue, rewrote lines, and debated camera placement with the kind of conviction usually reserved for directors. Crew members described Howard as patient, but visibly taxed, walking the fine line between respecting an actor's commitment and protecting the pace of production. The director's sets are known for harmony and quiet focus. Crowe's energy was volcanic, filling the room with creative static. One assistant director later said, "Every scene felt like a philosophical duel. Russell didn't just want to act the part. He wanted to wrestle it into submission." When the world is so simple that one can turn his astrological sign into a rule, then advantage. Frat Laurent de Carent de tagged Ben Mock Sepla, unkindly the great roach, Howard's devilish one. Having been afflicted by some, caused very distressful moments when Howard was rarely furious. He has been known to contain himself, run things calmly, energy is redirected instead of facing it head-on. However, that control was really challenged by Crowe's wildness. Some days, he had to change the whole shooting schedule in midstream to fit Crowe's action. And for Howard, that was definitely going to involve choosing the either-or option, alterations to coverage, or sets just to carry on into motion. It was in keeping with Howard's ability to absorb turbulence that would not be transmitted to the crew that the rhythm of the film worked. This was the final act of balancing it right on the one hand, keeping the production disciplined enough to deliver, but still leaving it to bend and stretch, where it could harness the brilliance Crowe could turn on when everything clicked. Howard would, years later, remark on the experience with characteristically annoying grace. "Some actors, you steer in the scene. Russell, You simply hold on tight and hope for the best," he added. The tension didn't matter, as the outcome was one that indicated Crowe's work in playing Nash among his best performances of vulnerability and obsession, enfolding the whole movie. The design and aliveness integrated into it by Howard hold broad frames where the emotional whirlwinds never drown the narrative. Together, they produced something that neither of them could have created alone. Of course, the bond weighed heavily on them, but behind all the Oscars and all the critical acclaim, Howard left the project completely drained and unwilling to work again with the actor, whose process was then so much negotiating. It was that magic moment when a director who prizes trust and predictability found it all to be both thrilling and draining. He had captured lightning in a bottle, but not without singeing his hands in the process. Rather, Crowe was a different person. In interviews, Crowe justified his intensity as an essential part of his artistic DNA. "I don't show up to be liked," he said. "I show up to find truth in every moment." He did not see it as ego, but rather commitment. Yet that same commitment could sometimes read as defiance. Crowe later stated his regard toward Howard, but hinted at the latter's steadiness as being confining. "Ron likes things clean and comfortable," he said in one interview. "Real art isn't comfortable." They still had mutual respect, but the gap between their philosophies was too wide for either to dare to cross it again. Asked in 2015 if he would ever work with Crowe again, Howard grinned and responded, "Some collaborations are meant to happen once." At last, A Beautiful Mind was both a triumph and a cautionary tale, declaring that even creative harmony comes with dissonance. Above all, it bolstered Howard's belief that filmmaking is the art of democratically engaging genius, not just controlling it. His patience during that storm became a defining feature of his style of leadership: calm, adaptable, quietly authoritative. Crowe's brilliance lit up the screen, but Howard's restraint rendered it bearable. Genius versus process, as it were, wasn't a feud. It was a study in contrasts, a test of whether the two artists could meet in the middle without completely losing themselves. They did well for a moment. That moment, however, won the world for Crowe and Howard. It also taught Howard a lesson that will last. Not all magic is repeatable. Not every storm is worth weathering twice. If you think you've heard all of Ron Howard's secrets, the next one will shock you to the core. 3. Henry Winkler. When Happy Days premiered in 1974, Ron Howard was already a familiar face to America. The former child star of The Andy Griffith Show had grown up in front of the camera, and now, as Richie Cunningham, he embodied a new kind of nostalgia. The wholesome, all-American teenager navigating friendship, romance, and small-town life in the 1950s. The show was designed around him. He was the heart and moral compass of the story. Then, in walked Henry Winkler, leather jacket slung over his shoulder, voice cool and casual as Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli. The Fonz was supposed to be comic relief, a tough guy with a soft spot for Richie. But within a season, something unexpected happened. The side character became the show. Audiences couldn't get enough of Winkler's charisma. He was rebellious, but kind, cool, yet compassionate, the kind of guy everyone wanted to be or befriend. Fan mail poured in, and the studio executives took notice. Before long, scripts were being rewritten to feature more Fonzie and less Richie. Storylines that had once revolved around Richie's moral dilemmas now pivoted around the Fonz's adventures. Even the show's marketing changed. Posters, magazine covers, and interviews increasingly spotlighted Winkler. Howard, who had been the show's anchor, suddenly found himself orbiting a new star. One crew member later admitted, "The irony was brutal. The clean-cut hero was getting overshadowed by the rebel in the leather jacket." At first, Howard tried to shrug it off. He was professional, grounded, and genuinely fond of Winkler as a person. The two shared mutual respect and no open hostility. But inside, it stung. For an actor who had carried the show from its pilot Watching the creative focus shift was a blow. Years later, Howard would describe that period with measured honesty. There were times I questioned my place on the show. I didn't resent Henry personally, but I absolutely resented how the narrative shifted around me. What made it worse was that none of it was anyone's fault. Winkler hadn't schemed his way into stardom. He'd simply connected with audiences in a way no one had anticipated. For Howard, it was an early education in the cruel unpredictability of fame. The tension wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet and professional. There were no shouting matches, no public feuds, just a subtle shift in dynamics. Cast members later recalled that Ron kept his composure even as his screen time diminished. His work ethic never faltered, but those close to the production noticed a difference in his energy. The easy enthusiasm that defined his early seasons dimmed slightly. He still delivered performances with warmth and authenticity, but he had begun to look beyond acting. On breaks, Howard spent time observing the crew, asking questions about cameras and lighting. The young actor who once dreamed of storytelling from the inside out was now preparing to step behind the camera entirely. In an unexpected way, Happy Days gave Howard his final push toward directing. Being overshadowed didn't just bruise his ego, it clarified his purpose. He realized he didn't want to chase the spotlight anymore. He wanted to build it. Instead of resenting the shift, he studied it. He learned how audience chemistry could reshape a production, how networks recalibrate around ratings, and how to manage creative egos without losing the bigger picture. Those lessons became foundational to his career as a filmmaker. Later, when asked about that transition, Howard said, "It taught me that stories evolve, and so do people. You can either fight the change or learn from it." He chose the latter. Looking back, there's something poetic about it all. The show that once made him feel replaced also gave him the insight to become one of Hollywood's most respected directors. His friendship with Winkler endured, proof that professional friction doesn't have to destroy personal bonds. In fact, decades later, the two would publicly praise each other, with Winkler calling Howard the most generous soul in the business. What began as a quiet competition ended as mutual admiration. When the side character eats the show isn't just a story about stolen spotlight. It's about humility, evolution, and the grace it takes to step aside and still shine. For Ron Howard, losing center stage on Happy Days wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of everything that came next. 2. Mel Gibson. When Ron Howard signed on to direct Ransom in 1996, it looked like a dream collaboration. He was already Hollywood's steady hand, calm, methodical, and deeply respected. Mel Gibson, meanwhile, was at the height of his stardom. Braveheart had just swept the Oscars, and he carried himself not just as an actor, but as a creative force in his own right. The pairing promised fireworks, two consummate professionals pushing each other to greatness. But what unfolded was less a partnership and more a tug-of-war for control. To outsiders, the tension was invisible. On screen, the film was tight, powerful, and impeccably crafted. Behind the camera, it was a battle between two leaders, one who guided through quiet authority and another who led through sheer force of will. From the start, Gibson's presence dominated the production. He was passionate, sharp, and brimming with ideas. But that passion came with strong opinions about everything: camera angles, pacing, dialogue, and even the tone of the performances around him. Howard, who preferred collaboration over confrontation, suddenly found himself navigating an actor who wanted to shape every detail. Mel doesn't just act in a scene, one crew member recalled. He wants to design it, direct it, and sometimes even rewrite it. Normally, Howard thrived in creative discussions. But this wasn't a discussion. It was a debate. Every adjustment became a negotiation. Every take a referendum on creative control. For a man known for harmony, the constant friction was exhausting. The pivotal clash came during the filming of a tense kidnapping scene one of the emotional anchors of the movie. Gibson reportedly halted production several times to propose alternate line readings and staging choices, insisting the sequence wasn't landing with enough raw intensity. Howard listened, adjusted, and tried to balance artistic respect with directorial authority. But the more he accommodated, the more Gibson pushed. "Ron's a diplomat, but even he has limits," said a lighting technician from the set. That day, you could see him calculating every word, trying to keep the peace without losing control. Eventually, Howard had to make a rare executive call, freezing production until the scene could be reset his way. It wasn't anger, it was precision reasserting itself. For Gibson, though, this wasn't rebellion. It was art. He approached acting with the same intensity he brought to directing, believing the process demanded full emotional and creative investment. To him, pushing boundaries was a form of commitment, not insubordination. In later interviews, he praised Howard's professionalism, but admitted they had very different rhythms. "Ron's the calm eye in the storm," Gibson said. "I'm the storm." It was a fair self-assessment. His explosive energy made Ransom electric, but it also turned each day into a balancing act between brilliance and burnout. For Howard, who built his career on balance, the experience reinforced an essential truth: two captains can't steer the same ship. Despite the turbulence, Ransom was a triumph, critically acclaimed and commercially successful. The tension didn't ruin the movie, it fueled it. Gibson's performance as a desperate father on the edge felt lived in and visceral, and Howard's direction gave it clarity and structure. Together, they created something that vibrated with controlled chaos, the perfect fusion of their opposing styles. But when the dust settled, Howard walked away with mixed feelings. He had proven he could manage a strong personality without losing the film's integrity. Yet, the toll of that management was steep. The constant push and pull had left him drained, and though he never badmouthed Gibson publicly, those close to him knew the partnership had reached its natural end. Get ready for our #1 moment. When Ron Howard names this final actor, it will blow your mind. 1. Marlon Brando. When Ron Howard was offered the chance to direct Marlon Brando in the mid-1990s, it felt like destiny. Brando wasn't just an actor. He was the actor. The man who had changed cinema forever with A Streetcar Named Desire and The Godfather. For any director, working with him was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. For Howard, it was something deeper. A childhood dream colliding with professional validation. He had grown up studying Brando's performances, admiring his ability to disappear into a role. Now, he would have the chance to guide that same force from behind the camera. But what began as a dream collaboration quickly unraveled into one of the most difficult experiences of Howard's career. A sobering reminder that sometimes legends are best admired from afar. The project itself was meant to be prestige material, a generational drama centered on an aging patriarch confronting the cost of his legacy. On paper, it was perfect for Brando. Emotionally complex, grand, yet intimate. But by this stage of his life, the once electric actor had developed a reputation for indifference, eccentricity, and outright rebellion on set. When production began, those rumors proved true. Brando showed up late, frequently unprepared, and insisted his dialogue be written on cue cards scattered around the set. Crew members recalled that his focus seemed to drift from moment to moment, as if the script itself were just background noise for whatever thought he happened to be having. Howard, known for order and efficiency, suddenly found himself directing a living legend who didn't seem interested in being directed at all. At first, Howard approached the challenge with patience. His philosophy had always been that respect earns respect, and he hoped that by accommodating Brando's quirks, he could earn his trust. But it quickly became clear that this wasn't a case of creative experimentation. It was disregard. Brando would disappear for hours without warning, demand entire scenes be rewritten, or decide mid-shot that he wanted to explore a different motivation, throwing the crew into confusion. One assistant director described it bluntly: "Every day felt like roulette. You didn't know if you were getting genius or chaos." The unpredictability wasn't thrilling, it was exhausting. And for a filmmaker who thrived on preparation, it felt like steering a ship through fog with a captain who refused to read the map. The breaking point came during a deceptively simple dialogue scene. What should have been an afternoon's shoot stretched into an ordeal that lasted hours. Brando stopped filming repeatedly, declared the lines beneath him, then wandered off set without explanation. When he returned 3 hours later, he announced he'd reimagined the character and wanted to start over from scratch. Howard, ever composed, tried to accommodate the shift while keeping the production afloat, but privately, the strain was immense. Crew members later recalled how the normally unflappable director seemed more withdrawn, calculating how to salvage the film around its mercurial star. The production limped forward, but the damage was done. What was meant to be a defining artistic collaboration had become an exercise in endurance. Intrinsically, the project never saw completion in its original form. The publicly advertised reasons were creative differences and scheduling impediments, while everyone behind the scenes understood that the project had simply grown untenable. With Brando's antics, morale had disappeared, schedules were disrupted, and Howard's legendary patience had been tested across the threshold of interruption. This was an agonizing chapter for someone who had worked hard for the reputation of professionalism, and it served to silently temper his thoughts around leadership. In interviews, he would later say, without identifying, "Some legends earn their reputation through their work. Others earn it through their behavior. It's important to know the difference." The point was made. Talent, however legendary, cannot excuse disrespect. And there you have it, the 6 actors who pushed Hollywood's nicest director past his limit. Even legends have breaking points, and Ron Howard's list proves that respect on set is never guaranteed. Which name surprised you the most? Do you think he was too patient or not patient enough? Let us know in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories. And don't go anywhere. Click the video on your screen right now for another shocking behind-the-scenes deep dive.